expect Brexit to come back, especially into the news, in a massive way. What we've heard from the comments of Jacob Rees-Mogg, the new article coming out today that Boris intends to use the Queen's speech to try and pick a fight with the EU, with apparently trying to give ministers the power to unpick the Northern Ireland Protocol, which, remember, is an international treaty which we'd signed and agreed to with the EU. All of this is going to come to a head as well. And remember, if we decide we are going to, let's say, stop the Northern Ireland Protocol or invoke Article 16 or start unpicking bits and pieces, the EU will fire back and it will just go, oh yeah, Brexit withdrawal agreement, that trade agreement, forget it. Unless you follow the rules, we're not going to enforce the rest. And don't forget, the EU can hurt us far, far more in this situation. The deep Brexiteer, of course, held belief is that they need us more than we need them, when it couldn't be, shall we say, more the other way around. We need the EU far, far more than it needs us. And this disastrous foretelling that it could happen very well in the next couple of months, and Brexit could very well come crashing back into the headlines, something which has been very, very quiet ever since David Frost left. But needless to say, obviously, Brexit has continued in other areas. We've talked before about it affecting manufacturing. We've talked about it before about it affecting fishing and other industries in the UK. But one of them, of course, is the music industry. And we've touched on this very, very briefly in the past before, but now it is becoming an ever, ever more increasing problem. The music and arts and creative industry that the music industry is part of is one of the UK's fastest growing industries. And for some reason, the government just can't get its head around that this is really important, that the artists to spread their music around need to tour. And there are some serious problems that this is causing in the music industry because effectively they've been handed a no-deal Brexit. So we're going to go diving into this article in NME because it's a doozy. I'll tell you that now. But before we do that, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee. And thank you very much to all those people who do support the channel that way and buy me coffee every so often. Thank you very much. So let's go diving into this then, shall we? This comes from the NME with the title of UK touring bands are suffering due to, quote, Brexit fuck-ups and lack of government control. UK touring bands are currently suffering at the hands of, quote, Brexit fuck-ups and lack of government control as they return to playing in Europe again as the pandemic restrictions ease. Artists, management, and politicians have told NME. Now, over at least 1 year on from the music industry essentially being handed a no-deal Brexit, when the UK government failed to negotiate visa-free travel and Europe-wide permits for musicians and crews, artists are now attempting to hit the road again after COVID and previously prevented them from touring, only now to find themselves practically on the rocky road for the first summer of playing shows in Europe post-Brexit. Just last week, White Lies were forced to cancel the opening night of their 2022 European tour in Paris due to Brexit legislation and seeing their equipment that was held up for 2 days. So this is the problem that we were always talking about. And they've probably lost hundreds, if not thousands of pounds just having their equipment hold up and not being able to play that first part of the show. And remember, if you have one part of the show that gets cancelled, that can probably have repercussions to the tour at least further down the line as well. And this is a nightmare for these bands and managements for trying to do this. And they have my absolute sympathy for these, because it's, how can you sort of go out there now and start touring reliably when this stuff is going on? So anyway, this is they talk to the drummer now, Jack Lawrence Brown, saying that the situation is incredibly frustrating. He said, "It's tricky for us because we've been doing this for quite a while. And to our minds, we were well prepared for what was to come," he said. "We've done our best to try and ensure that I'd long been prepared in any circumstances. It's very frustrating when you prepare for as long as we have, then rock up to the first venue to then find that your equipment has been stuck in a 25-mile long queue on the M20 through no fault of your own, and no fault, of course, of the trucking company either. It wasn't the plan that we've been trying to work hard to get right." While admitting that the confusion and delays regarding the P&O ferries hasn't helped matters, the drummer put the majority of the blame at the foot of the Brexit-related red tape regarding Venus and Carnes, a document detailing what goods and equipment are being taken across the borders. "Prior to Brexit, this kind of tailback was never an issue," he said. "There is now a huge amount of paperwork for bands to deal with if they want to get themselves into Europe. And although we've had everything fully in order with our carnets stamped and everything good to go, we've still found ourselves in a situation where, because of Brexit, there are these inhumane motorway queues. And for the lovely guy who's been driving our gear around Europe for the next month, he had to sit in his cab for over a day without any services. That's not right." And it isn't right. We've heard some terrible stories of truckers from like the Netherlands and Belgium being stuck in their cab for days with no services. And one of the worrying things, when the Kent Chamber of Commerce went to talk to like the police were like, "You might have to prepare for this to become like a regular thing." Because it's not just the delays that are causing these things on P&O, but this is obviously a large delay. It was obviously, there was weather conditions as well that added to this. This is Brexit. This is what, again, these Brexiteers will say that they didn't vote for this, but no, this is exactly what they voted for. This is the exact same situation. And unfortunately, the band, again, White Lies, have been caught up in this. And I wouldn't be surprised if other bands further in this summer get caught up in this. So this is their announcement to this. Again, the article continues, again with a strong following in countries such as Belgium and the Netherlands. Lawrence Brown argued that White Lies were looking forward to playing Paris in order to try and increase their fan base in France, and that with all the other shows booked, that's needed to happen for this to work. And again, he's right. If you're an artist, you need to tour. You need to increase your fan base. You cannot, especially in the age of like, music online and globalizations, bands need to tour even more, because that is where very often now the money is. So bands touring and be able to expand their fan base doing these tours, it makes perfect business sense. But if they're now locked out of doing this, this is locking British music out of Europe almost permanently. And remember, it also depends on what infrastructure they have behind. Like, how is their management being handling this carnet system? I don't know if they'll talk about it, but these carnet documents are quite big. They're not simple things to fill out. Anyway, he continues. When you book a long tour like that, the one we've just started, we need to reach each of those 30 dates to happen, he said. We cannot afford for shows to be cancelled or pulls. It eats into whatever profit we may have had. And we're not working at such a level where we're making huge profits. So again, it's exactly the same what we've been hearing from UK manufacturers. they're losing out on profits. So it's exactly the same situation that many other UK businesses are in. He went on, when you have to pull a show for something as irritating as your truck not being able to get where it needs to through no fault of your own, that's money that we have lost as a band pretty directly through Brexit fuck ups and essentially a lack of government control over what's happening in Dover. Lawrence Brown then went on to argue that the new rules and paperwork created huge costs for future live music tours on the continent, and they look likely to create a glass ceiling that prevents rising and developing talent from being able to afford to do so. It's basically now an extra hurdle, which is new, he said. Having toured America, we've got experience in dealing with carnets and more. We're at the level where we can hand out those jobs to someone else. However, it's very, very complicated stuff, and it has to be filled out for a band to go to Europe. It doesn't really matter if you're Coldplay or a brand new act. The paperwork has to be filed and is now incredibly more time consuming. If you want to get it done properly, then you have to outsource it to someone else. And that's the cost. We're lucky enough to be in a position where we'll be able to pay someone to deal with our carnets for us. And many UK businesses are not in that position because, and especially obviously it's a band, so they might have to just fill out one for that, that one time going over. But imagine you're a company where you're having to fill out multiple. Maybe, maybe it could be like once, couple times a month. Maybe if you're bigger, it could be like maybe once or twice a week, or maybe even it's more than that. Maybe you're having to fill out this stuff on the daily. That's time. That paperwork takes time. It takes money. If anything goes wrong, if you forget to dot an I or cross a T, that entire load gets held up, and that creates more tailbacks, and that creates delays. He continued, this basically has been brought in for any UK act that now wants to do a show in France. It's not traveling across the world. It's just a few hours away, and you still have to fill in insane paperwork. The drummer argued that White Lies has a strong following in Central Europe, though being able to tour heavily there in their early days, which brought such opportunities would be in doubt now for rising talent due to the new costs and complications. It would be a real shame if, as a British artist, you didn't have the kind of label funding to at least get us to out to do those shows, he said. If you try that without that, then it's costing you money. But factor into that the cost of all the new Brexit paperwork, the carnets, and that there are going to be lots of artists that just cannot withstand the cost to do it and won't do it. To deal with these daunting issues ahead, Lawrence Brown has encouraged artists wishing to play in Europe to seek out government funding, to check out their advice from bodies such as the Musicians Union, and to try and get organised. He added, get yourself in order before you go. Otherwise, you'll be sure to have a very painful time. Try to stomach the horrors of getting across the border because the best venues are often found in Europe. Again, imagine this is what many businesses are now finding. Some of their best customers are in Europe. And now because of Brexit, these trade barriers that are in a way that haven't been put there by Europe, these are there because we have left and we have made the decision to leave. But again, I want to stress at the referendum, staying in the single market and customs union was the position of leave. We have been forced because of the Brexit hardliners into this situation. Annabelle Coldrick is the chief executive of the Music Managers Forum, and again, representing managers across the UK. She agreed with what White Lies had gone through was a nightmare, but said that they were not alone. Not surprising. I wouldn't be surprised if this becomes more of an issue. We are hearing strange things from bands, such as being told that they're not allowed a passenger ticket on a splitter van and that they have to buy a freight ticket instead, which is 3 times the price, Corey told ME. Musicians also have been told if they're capable of carrying portable instruments, then they'd be okay without a carnet. And then we've heard from Musicians Union that one of their members has been fined £150 at the French border for not having a carnet. So There's even wrongful information out there, which is even more worrying, of course. It continues. It said, it's getting very uncertain. It's getting really tricky. We're going to have to learn how it's all done and applied on the ground. Coldrick argued that there's a lot of what's been going on has nothing to do with P&O and was down to unnecessarily Brexit-related bureaucracy. We've also heard from people filing out all their paperwork correctly and sending their merch out to Germany for a tour for it to go on sale, but then to get randomly stopped at Rotterdam and then not getting to its destination until the tour dates have ended, she said. They can't sell it, so it's a huge loss of money. This is what we said all the time, and it's not just things like tour dates here for musicians trying to get merch, which again, remember, this is how musicians make money. They go on tour, so obviously you find a venue, people pay the ticket, musicians get some of the cut, the venue gets a cut of that ticket price as well. But this is where the bands get to sell their merch, so you've got probably what, t-shirts, keychains, whatever, you name it. All that profit is probably going to the band. And if they can't do that, what's the point of touring in Europe? If you're cutting off merch sales on tour and stuff, that's a massive loss of revenue stream for these bands. And it's just going to make touring for these bands not worth it. But any up-and-coming British band has to do this, has to be able to get their name out there to, again, build their audience. Every popular band, sooner or later, has to leave the UK. Whether they go to America, whether they go to Europe, anywhere else. But it's far easier to go to Europe because it's, used to be just across the pond. And it was simple to go to. But now that's being cut off. And that's really worrying because, as he said earlier on in the article, that is going to cause huge problems for any up-and-coming bands about this. Coldrick, of course, did hail as, quote, some small victories, such as achieving the visa-free touring for artists in Spain after an industry-led campaign, and the industry body Live successfully lobbying for the UK trucks and larger buses to have a dual registration to be able to switch to an EU number plates when crossing the border. But then, ultimately, the real problems are only now starting to come through, and the government are not just taking it seriously. Everything is more costly, more complicated, and more uncertain. That's Brexit in a nutshell. We're being told that for one thing they're finding out another. We're not out of the woods, and this year is going to be a really tricky one. The government doesn't seem to get the small to mid end of the market. All the working groups that we've had, where we've been sitting down with the government every few weeks to try and work through all this stuff, I just feel like they've lost interest. We've had one meeting this year and the minister didn't even turn up. There's a war going on in Ukraine and there's the cost of living crisis. The government attention, of course, is elsewhere, but the impact of Brexit is becoming ever more real. And I'm not confident because I don't think the current government takes the music seriously, especially as a wealth generator. I know that's depressing, but I know other governments take it a lot more seriously. Labour MP and DCMS Select Committee member Kevin Brahman has long been a campaigner for a better Brexit deal for the music industry, and even raised a recent article in the House of Commons to call for more to be done. When Bremer raised the issue, the Conservative leader of the House, Jacob Rees-Mogg, then defended the government's stance. Before confessing, he said, I have failed in that I have not read the, quote, New Musical Express this morning, or indeed any morning that I can ever recall. Again, they're just trying to get it out. Brennan has described Mogg and the government's response as pretty hopeless. The problem is that people like Jacob Rees-Mogg see Brexit as some kind of religious achievement, Darren told MME. When people are asking perfectly reasonable questions like how might we try to mitigate the impact of this, lots of people in the government just go into a default position of there can be absolutely nothing wrong with Brexit, this is a good thing, which is ridiculous. Again, We've said it before numerous times. Brexit has come into becoming such a cult-like status in the government. It's causing huge problems because if you're in the Brexiteer mindset, Brexit is meant to be a good thing, then there should be no problems. But it's not just Brexit. We see this in the cost of living crisis, the energy crisis, any crisis you can name has become under this massive Tory ideology bubble, and they're just not accepting that it's a thing. So the former even Brexit minister and chief negotiator, David Frost, has even admitted that the Brexit deal presented a whole set of problems for touring musicians and their crew. Since his departure, though, Bremen has hoped for a government to try and deal with this in a more practical manner, but has found that ideology is getting in the way. What a surprise! What a surprise! They have treated this as if it's an immigration issue rather than something that is vital to our economy. The fact that he has confessed that he's never even read Enemy was perhaps not the most surprising admission ever. But what was disturbing was the glee at which he admitted it. Basically, ministers should understand that the music industry and creative industries are the fastest growing sector in the UK and are hugely important to our economy. They should be aware of these concerns that are being expressed. And I do not think were the many, quote, pop culture references in Jacob Rees-Mogg's upbringing. I think he was too busy riding the magic carpet of privilege which he grew up on. Can't disagree with that. I cannot disagree with that. Arguing that the solution was ultimately an agreement to try and ensure that UK musicians can tour freely across the European Union and vice versa, without added complications, that Bremen feared that it would not be possible, as, quote, the Home Office think, that Britain will be invaded by hordes of musicians coming over here, trying to entertain our people, then settling in the UK. It's absolute nonsense. But in their desperate ideological wish to say that European citizens shouldn't be treated any differently than anybody else, they're ignoring the economic reality of how important the music industry is to our economy and how much Europe is a part of that. And how many British businesses are there that will also be badly hit by all those barrings to touring, he said. He also added, most of the progress that has been made has been by the industry rather than the government. Well, the government tries to steal credit for it. And I'm not optimistic that these issues can be overcome. I'm not optimistic that that it will exist in the government to really actually take this on. And of course, it goes on to talk about Mogg got voted Villain of the Year. Of course, again, there's independent artists having all these problems, and of course, there is actually a fund to try and help those affected by artists as well. And of course, White Lies, you might have never heard of them. Go and give them a listen. Go to iTunes, buy a song from them. Help them out. At least. But yeah, not surprising. It is not surprising at all, because this is exactly what we are hearing from every other industry that is being affected by Brexit. And the worst is yet to come. But of course, to quote Jacob Rees-Mogg, the best is yet to come. If this is quote start of the good times, I'd hate to see what the best yet is to actually come, because now we're talking about getting rid of regulations and a whole load of other stuff. And the second we start to get rid of regulations, it makes it that much harder to move stuff over into the EU. And again, we've been saying this time and time again. This is what Brexit was going to do. This is what the problem was going to cause. And as was brought up, every single time, sensible concerns are brought up, or just a concern like, okay, if we've left this is going to cause this problem. How do we solve it? How do we get around it? The answer was, and always was, well, it was to begin with, that's just Project Fear. Then it became, you've just got to believe in Brexit. Then it became, There's nothing wrong with this. This is just a natural part of these problems. And now you're like, what's going on? What's going on? But it has really become a cult, and expect this to become Brexit, especially probably in the next month or so, to come roaring back into the head of all things. So look forward to that. Look forward to that indeed.